Here comes the clap. Hey there everyone, Joe Allam here and welcome to New Zealand. This is Lake Wakatipu in Queenstown. We're in the South Island. It's absolutely stunning and we're just rounding up a trip across New Zealand, and I wanted to make a video that kind of shares my tips and thoughts on the best places to travel New Zealand and what you can do in those areas. So last year we did 3 weeks and we travelled around in a camper van. The content we made there is what invited us back to New Zealand for 6 weeks this time. This time we did it in a car, staying at B&Bs and hotels and places. So I feel like I've got a good amount of knowledge that should be able to weigh up the pros and cons of campervanning versus road tripping in a car, staying in hostels, B&Bs, or staying in campsites and other places. So if you're unaware of New Zealand, it's primarily based upon 2 islands. You've got the North Island and the South Island. Both have very similar traits to them, but there are also distinct personalities about either of them. But if you are traveling from a far distance, there's a good chance you will most likely land in the North Island. So you could land in Auckland or Wellington. Those are the 2 major cities. So for the purpose of this video, I'm going to direct this as if we are going from the very north to the very south. It's just the easiest way of getting through a whole itinerary of stuff. I'm also going to leave in the description some little timestamps so that you can jump to particular locations and links to existing vlogs that I've already made from those destinations so you can see even more content. So before you come to New Zealand, you need to ask yourself, what do you want to get the most out of your time here? For me, I'd say there are 3 main areas you need to think about. There's the nature side of things, the culture, and then the adrenaline activity-based stuff. So for me, when I think of New Zealand, I think of epic nature across a relatively accessible distance. There's so much condensed into a pretty small country, let's be honest. Compared to say somewhere like America, which equally has epic landscapes, but you've got to travel a much greater distance to get there. So for me, I think of New Zealand as epic nature. There's also extreme culture differences with a lot of tribal backgrounds, wine heritage, extensive food from all over the world. And then you have some other areas of cities and urban. By the way, I should probably also point out that on jellyjourneys.com, our travel blog, we're going to have a roundup post of all of the various different places of accommodation that we would recommend and maps and further itinerary details. So if you want to check out even more stuff along with all the photos, then head to that blog post. It'll be linked in the description below. So let's say you fly into Auckland. Now a lot of people will actually just head straight south from Auckland. We're definitely guilty of that. The first time we came here on our 3-week trip, we didn't head north. But this year things were slightly different and we went up to the Bay of Islands in a town called Paihia. It's generally a good little hub town. There's plenty of places to stay on a variety of different budgets. And in the Bay of Islands, you can expect some really tropical, nice, sort of like hot climates. Some areas you really wouldn't expect to see in New Zealand. You can go island hopping, there's plenty of boat tours and stuff. It's generally quite unknown to a lot of people for New Zealand, so it's definitely worth checking out, and the other areas of the Northland. And then coming back down to Auckland, you could spend a couple of days here. Personally, I wouldn't be in New Zealand for the city side of things. I'm generally here for the nature stuff. But in Auckland, what you can expect is a relatively small and easily accessible city. There's generally a good sort of culture around food and coffee, and you can just, use it as a little bit of a hub. But personally, I think of New Zealand as nature, so I wouldn't generally spend too long in Auckland. It seems like a great city to live in. That's about as far as I go with that. Moving around from Auckland, head to a place called Hot Water Beach. We went there last year and it was just one of the most incredible nights we've ever had. Essentially, it's a beach where you can dig holes and hot water from volcanic springs or volcanic substance, wherever that's from, creates a little hot pool for you. And we saw the most amazing night sky when we stayed there. So that is a must-visit place, I would say. Heading further south and you'll come to a place called Rotorua. Now Rotorua is packed with so much adrenaline-based activities, nature and culture, so you could potentially spend a whole trip just in Rotorua alone. One of the top things that we did there was whitewater rafting. That was a phenomenal experience, something that I would really hold as like a true New Zealand experience. But there's so many other things there. You can do skydiving, you can do orbing, all sorts of things. The lake there is beautiful. There's just so much to see in Rotorua. Heading a little bit further south and you'll come to a place called Ruapehu. So Ruapehu and the Tongariro Crossing is again a vast nature area. It's perfect if you want to go hiking. There's loads of mountainous regions. In the winter it's ski fields. To me, coming through here kind of gives you that real sense of being in New Zealand when you're in the North Island. If you've come from the north, once you get to Ruapehu, that's where it really kind of hits. You're like, I'm in New Zealand, mountains. Just around the corner from Ruapehu, you have the Whanganui River. Now this is kind of like a lifeline throughout the center of the North Island. There is just so much culture and activities you can do here. You can go canoeing, you can do multi-day expeditions on the water. There's plenty of Maori culture that you can learn and sort of tribal history. That is a real hub of the North Island. Another area of the North Island that is highly enjoyable is the Waitomo region. So around here you'll have the blackwater rafting, so you can go caving underwater and you can see all the glowworms and stuff. If you're a massive Hobbit fan or Lord of the Rings fan, you can travel about an hour away and you can go and see the film set. Personally, I would say if you're a really big fan, it's definitely worth it. If you're on a tighter timescale or an itinerary, it can take up a large amount of your day and time. So take it into consideration depending on what your preference is and the length of time you're in New Zealand. Now heading to the very south of the North Island, you'll come to Wellington, the capital city of New Zealand. I personally really enjoy Wellington. It has such a creative vibe to it. It's very similar to cities like Melbourne or Bristol in the UK. Very small, very easily accessible, but so much culture and art about. Again, I'm not in New Zealand to see the cities, so I personally would only really spend a couple of days there, but a lot of people come through Wellington just to take the ferry to the South Island. If you do have the extended time, I would recommend spending a day or two in Wellington. Take a walk up to the Mount Victoria Peak. That's a great lookout across the city, easily done in a couple of hours there and back, and you've got great views across everything. And best of all, it's free. Okay, so if you now want to go to the South Island, you've generally got two options to get there. You can either take the ferry or you can take a flight from the airport. If you're taking the ferry, bear in mind on how you're going to get there. If you're going by car, most car rental companies won't actually let you take the car across, and you'll have to have a rental in the North Island and a rental in the South Island. If you're doing a camper van, most of those are pretty much fine for you to take the camper on the ferry from the North to the South Island, vice versa. I've personally never done a flight, but I think the ferry is actually a great experience. And as you come into the South Island through the Marlborough Sounds, it's just like a teaser for the beauty of the South Island to come. Now with your ferry options, you have two options. You've got the Inter-Islander ferry and the Bluebridge ferry. They generally offer the same thing and they're about the same price. Inter-Islander, I'd say, is a bigger boat, maybe has a little bit more to offer, but with paid upgrades. The Bluebridge one generally has more things included, so like cinema seats and other stuff, but it's a much smaller boat, so it's a slightly different experience. One thing that might sway your decision is Bluebridge is still a family-run company. Inter-Islander is run by Kiwi Rail, so if that maybe sets the tone for what you want to book. Cool, so you made it to the South Island. Now one of the first destinations that a lot of people would do on their itinerary is visit Abel Tasman. Now this is around a 3-hour drive from Picton where the ferry drops you off, so make sure you're well rested on the ferry. It's a long drive to get there. But in the Abel Tasman National Park you can expect pure epic beauty with amazing beaches, huge coastlines that you can go flatwater kayaking, plenty of locations you can go hiking and other stuff. Now one thing to bear in mind with Abel Tasman is the weather. Now if this is kind of wintry season or if the weather's looking really bad and very wet, generally the area kind of shuts down and the tourism activities don't really go ahead. So depending on what you're looking for, if you're doing completely self-guided tours and you love going through the rain and forests, then perfect. If you're looking for those amazing beaches and you want to relax in the sun, or you want to go kayaking on nice calm waters, then pay attention to the weather if you can. So coming further south into the South Island, you come into the Nelson region and particularly Nelson Lakes. So Lake Rotorua is a fantastic place and a really memorable experience for me. It just kind of felt so New Zealand when we arrived there. Loved it there. Now there are many great drives across the South Island of New Zealand, but one in particular really stands out for me, and that is Arthur's Pass through the Castle Hill region into Canterbury. Now if you drive through here, you can expect huge mountains and valleys and a road that kind of goes through, and one place in particular is this fantastic bridge that just separates them. But yeah, Arthur's Pass is a fantastic region and probably one of my favourite areas of New Zealand. It's just got everything that I want to see. If you are going through the Campervan, you could stop off at a place called Lake Pearson. It's a great area to stop. Another thing to point out if you have a campervan is a thing called freedom camping. Now you can research into this, but the general gist of it is that there are certain areas across New Zealand that you can camp for free, just off the road, as long as you have a self-contained camper. Now a self-contained camper means you have toilet facilities on board. So when you're booking something, make sure it has self-contained and you can make the benefit of freedom camping. Essentially what it means is you could camp, say, at somewhere like a Department of Conservation National Park or Scenic Reserve or somewhere like that, and it's just an open area that you can camp for free legally. So do your research into freedom camping, but you can definitely make the most of it throughout most of New Zealand. So I'm going to link to an app in the description from Rankers, and we used it extensively last year. Just make sure you download the maps offline beforehand. They're about 1 gigabyte in size, so make sure you do it somewhere with good internet. That's probably before you reach New Zealand because internet's not very good here. And you can see various different campsites, reviews, photos, paid for campsites, free campsites, what you can expect and what you can offer. Now on the west coast of the South Island, you have the Southern Alps and some of the glacier regions. So you've got Franz Josef Glacier and Fox Glacier. Now these are two of the fastest moving glaciers in the world, and they actually flow through a rainforest to a fairly low level, I think 250 meters above sea level, which is pretty much unheard of for a glacier. Now in this area you can do plenty of glacier activities and all sorts of things, from helicopter rides to glacier hiking, skydiving, plenty of different things. There's so much to offer. There's literally helicopters flying about all over the place there. Now if you're going to go here, I would definitely recommend having a larger budget, because some of these activities are pretty expensive, but also if you can, try and define your time again based upon the weather. I think they get around 200 days worth of rain in Franz Josef alone, and if it's raining or if it's too windy or if there's too much cloud cover, you generally can't do many of the activities that are helicopter dependent. So that being said, if you're on a very short trip, you could either chance it and get lucky with the weather, or you may want to look to some other areas. Yeah, depending how you go. I personally love the helicopter flights around there. It's so scenic and you've got perfect views across all of the Alps. So depending on what the weather outlook is, if you've say got like a few days that are good weather, or a few days in a few days time that's good weather, you could change your route depending on where you want to fly from. So if you want to do a scenic flight from say Franz Josef, or the complete other side of the Alps in Mount Cook Village, there's 2 different options you could do that. So yeah, weigh that up depending on how the weather's looking. Now another area you could do a flight in New Zealand if you're desperate to get in a helicopter or a plane and see some of the mountainous regions is the Milford Sound and Doubtful Sound region in the Fiordland. Now this is the very south of the South Island, and I would actually recommend staying in Queenstown and then doing a day trip with a tour provider to see those regions. It's a long drive from Queenstown if you're doing it yourself. It's around 6 hours to Milford Sound, and if you're generally thinking of doing activities, that probably means you're going to need to stay somewhere like Tiano for a couple of nights. If the weather's bad and everything gets cancelled, like what happened to us last year, you end up missing out in a few days. So I would definitely recommend doing Queenstown and letting someone else do all the driving for you in a single day. Now the Milford Sound region is extremely popular for boat rides and kayaking. You can see all sorts of wildlife, waterfalls. It's just crazy beautiful landscapes. We have heard a lot about Doubtful Sound being a much better and quieter area to visit. We've never personally done it, but that's just my knowledge I'm going to pass on to you guys. Now if you're going to do these tours from Queenstown, you may as well see Queenstown itself, because it is probably my favourite town across all of New Zealand, and most other people who visit New Zealand always love Queenstown. You can get a complete variety of everything here. It's such a busy, bustling area. You've got adrenaline activities, bungee jumping, skydiving. It's got an epic winter season for ski fields. You've got a crazy summer season, this lake, everything to do in New Zealand, Queenstown's got it. Now I touched upon Mount Cook Village earlier, but if you want to experience even more in the area, you can head there and you can do self-guided tours, you can do some hiking across places like the Hooker Valley, you can do some four-wheel driving experiences, all sorts of things around this area. And if you're an astrophotographer, this is a perfect area for you because it's a national dark reserve. It's one of the darkest skies in the world. If you go there on a clear day, you should be able to see thousands of stars and the Milky Way and so much. It's just got an epically open dark sky. Now you don't necessarily have to be in that area or Tekapo to see that, but it is just generally defined as the darkest place. Okay, so those are my top tips of places and things to do in New Zealand. Now I do actually have a few extra shout outs of some nice places to visit, and they'll be detailed a little bit more in the blog, or you can check out previous vlogs. So places like Dunedin, it's a city in the southeast and it's full of culture and pretty busy. It's a big student town. It's also got a big surf vibe and it's generally just a pretty cool little city. Or if you want to go somewhere like Hanmer Springs, that's got like an alpine feel to it. There's the natural hot springs. Or areas around Christchurch, you've got Akaroa where you can do like boat cruises and again, just more natural beauty. Now, speaking of Christchurch, as you probably know, Christchurch has been hit by various earthquakes and disasters and stuff. Now it is a redeveloping city and it's got a large amount to offer on the horizon. If you do have a limited time or itinerary, generally a lot of people only fly out of Christchurch. I'd say it's still worth seeing the city, but just take into consideration that a lot of it is being rebuilt at the moment. So which is the best way to see New Zealand? By campervan or by car? There are pros and cons to either. If you go by campervan, you can generally define your route and your itinerary based upon the weather. Because you're living in your van, you can drive as far as you need to go, and you can book your campsites and other stuff literally on the day or even the day before. If you go in slightly less of a peak season, it doesn't matter too much about when you're traveling. If you go in the peak of summer, I have heard of campsites filling up fairly quickly, so maybe just give them a phone call just beforehand to make sure that they've got space, but I think you should be all right. If you're going by car, you'll have the luxury of being able to travel faster. You don't have the hassles of packing up your campervan everywhere. You've got flexibility within your day that you can go and explore a town or other areas. However, if you travel by car, you will most likely probably want to book your accommodation in advance. And if you do that, then you miss out on that flexibility of your itinerary. So if you book an area, say in Franz, Josef, and the weather is so terrible, you'll end up going to Franz Josef and not being able to do anything because the weather's bad. But because you've already booked it, you kind of have to stay. So pros and cons to either. Then the other factor is the cost. If you're traveling by campervan, you will have to probably have a upfront cost and an upfront bond that may come to in the region of around 3,000 to 5,000 New Zealand dollars that you will need to have available. If you're doing it by car, the car rental may actually be cheaper, but your accommodation costs will be higher. So they probably work out about the same. You just need to work out what it is that you want to get out of this trip. So one thing to definitely be wary of is the peak times and the complete flexibility in the price. So as an example, last year when we did the campervanning, it was in autumn, so it was very much at the end of the season, and we were able to book a campervan only about four weeks before we actually went, and it cost us $1,500. Now take into consideration this year where we're thinking of doing a campervan just slightly earlier in the year, for pretty much the same duration of time, it was going to cost us around $8,000. So that's a huge fluctuation in price that you need to be aware of. So essentially, do your research and check out comparison sites for your best prices. So that concludes this video. Make sure you do check out that blog post. It's probably going to be a lot easier to follow as everything will be collated in a long list, and we'll have recommendations on accommodation and various other things, as well as some information on maybe what you could bring to New Zealand or what you can't bring with their strict biosecurity laws and other things like that. But generally, that is everything from me. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel to see more of those travel vlogs and other destinations I'm traveling around the world. Also check out those previous vlogs in a playlist from the times that I've spent in New Zealand. There's so much more information, and hopefully it will inspire you to visit certain areas of New Zealand. Like I said, I've spent a good 9 weeks in total here, and I feel like I've got a good amount of exposure for the areas. So if you do have any particular questions, then leave a comment down below. I'm sure I can help you out, or some other Kiwis can get involved and join the discussion and keep things going and great and happy. I'm rambling, I'm not sure how to end this video. So yeah, thumbs up if you like this, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye bye.